Thank you everyone for joining us today for the Skeptics Guide to CoPilot from the IT team. So I am Conan, General Manager of the IT team, and we're joined here with Joe. Do you want to introduce yourself, Joe?
Hi, everybody. Yep, business consultant here at the IT team. So thanks for joining us on this afternoon.
Excellent. So we're going to start with a bit of a poll, and that's just to help us understand the level of usage of CoPilot and AI. Don't be afraid to answer honestly. It's really just I'm expecting a broad range of usage here. I've got an answer too. Okay, names are recorded, but we can't see it anyway. So, 2 responses. Can you see that poll? Can the audience see the poll, Tay? Do you know? On the spot. Okay, so at the moment it's 50% yes, do you currently have CoPilot 365? Actually 55 no. So the majority of the attendees do not currently have CoPilot 365. Well, that's good. Good to have a good mix. Okay, I think that's probably a decent start. A few people will probably still coming back from their coffees, but just feel free to answer that when you can. But look, it looks like the majority of the attendees do not presently have CoPilot 365, which is great. It gives a bit of a range, and we'll probably slightly cater the way we're sort of talking about things, or the depth will go based off that. Thank you, everyone. So look, the reason this is called the Skeptics Guide to CoPilot is ultimately because we here at the IT team are not necessarily the most overwhelmingly positive about Microsoft Copilot for 365. We are users of the tool, and we'll get into that soon. But we, contrary to what we are seeing out in the market, LinkedIn and Chatter and everything, we haven't had, and the customers we're interacting with haven't necessarily had the most I'd say overwhelmingly positive experience with the tool. And we think that's actually an important message, because there are some people who are having their expectations are struggling to match with the reality. And we've been talking about this for some time, doing something like this. So we're going to kick into it. Thank you for attending, though, everyone. So the key points for today, what are we going to try and go into? So most importantly, what works and what doesn't work with CoPilot. We decided to do a decent number, or showcase quite a few examples, although it's quite difficult to track timing, but we think it is valuable to show the tools in action. We pre-recorded it just because AI is somewhat volatile, but we want to show some things that work, some things that don't work with CoPilot 365. Importantly, we're going to start off with talking about the different editions of CoPilot, because it is very confusing. The product we're talking about today is CoPilot 365 primarily, but there's CoPilots all over the place, and Microsoft is regularly confusing with their branding and their naming. But in this, so it's important that we do explain those different versions. Now we're going to talk about the experience of our co-learning groups. We've had various co-learning groups throughout the year on CoPilot, and I think it is important to talk about that and the big takeaways we found from the co-learning group. Not everyone had the same outcome, but I think we've got a good idea about what the vibe was. We're going to talk about some of the other AI tools we use and like, and we'll talk some on how to protect yourself in the governance aspect. We're not going to go too deep on that, but we do think it's an important part of the conversation. And we will talk a little bit about how to improve your usage. Now, this is not the table of contents. It's going to go a little bit all over the place, but we're hoping that is kind of the biggest part of this. So that's the kind of core of this webinar. We'll also be touching on how to get started and that type of thing as well for those that aren't using it. I'm glad I kept that slide on. So, various editions of CoPilot. So CoPilot for 365, this one here, is really what we're going to be talking about today. And I think it's because if you're in the business sense, if you're looking at things from a commercial sense, Microsoft discussing CoPilot, their share price, all that type of thing, it is around CoPilot for 365. That is the flagship product. That's the one that interacts with Teams, Word, Outlook, PowerPoint. There's an additional cost per user. It has a $600 cost per year, and that's what we're going to center on. Now, there is also CoPilot for Windows. Some of you may see in the bottom, I think it's bottom right, so it should be that side if it's a mirror, of your start bar, you might have a little, is it yellowy, orangey, sort of blue? I'm not sure what the color is. An unusual icon that is CoPilot. Although I had it 3 weeks ago and now I don't, so it does seem to come and go. But that is CoPilot for Windows 11. Now, that is identical, pretty much identical to the CoPilot in the browser. That can be seen as a competitor to ChatGPT. It's not using your data. It's not interacting with your Office. It's reasonably dumb, so to speak. But those things are free. Those products are free. And but they seem to disappear, and they can be very annoying in the browser. It constantly pops up and stuff like that, which might cause a bit of frustration. But those two products, whilst part of that is shown in the Teams functions we will be showing, ultimately that's the free edition of CoPilot, and it's not the key thing we'll be showing today. Also, Sales CoPilot, which is part of Dynamics 365, so we're not going to be discussing that, even though Joe's got a bit of experience. If you want to know about that, feel free to ask him separately. And the CoPilot agents, we may have a little bit of time to show at the end. This is a newish feature that Microsoft are promoting, and it is quite interesting and cool. And we do think it could be its own video or post or blog or webinar or something, but at the moment we'll see if we can get to it. Lastly, there's the Azure OpenAI. So this is for private usage. It's adaptable to your own requirements. It's got a consumption cost, but it's really about a specific use case. An example that Joe assisted a customer with was using it to rapidly transcribe thousands of pages of scanned documents. It's not something you could easily upload to CoPilot or ChatGPT, but that's where Azure OpenAI can come in handy if you've got a specific repeatable use case. We're not going to be talking about that today. So I'll just recap. We're going to be focusing on CoPilot for 365. You'll see a little bit of these two, the CoPilot for Windows 11 and Bing Chat. Sales CoPilot, CoPilot agents, Azure OpenAI, not part of the conversation today. Confusing. There's a lot of CoPilots around. But the big one is this CoPilot for 365. So the IT team's experience so far. So we've been using CoPilot for a year. We got it the day it came out, CoPilot for 365, I should say. And CoPilot's technically been released for a year. For enterprise clients, got a couple of months head start. Now we've been using it since its launch, but we also we're using Bing Chat, the CoPilot web-based one, and ChatGPT since early last year. About 7 users at our organization with licenses. We were very keen and quite enthusiastic to actually expand that based on our perception of the product, but we haven't had great push to do that. There's some of those 7 users are heavier than others. So there's a bit of a mix of usage. We have moved the licenses around, which you can do. When we started with it, we followed a training regime that we use through this training platform we work with. But we also engaged some outside assistance to kind of help propel us forward from some of our vendors. And we made a decision to try and use it over ChatGPT. We kind of said, look, let's stop using ChatGPT. And we tried that at the start to try and build up that sort of familiarity with the tool. Now, I will get into this in great detail progressively through the session, but I can say that the perception has generally been very mixed at the IT team. We were immediately quite underwhelmed, but we do still use it, those that have a license, very regularly. So it's complicated, let's say. So what we thought we'd start to break up, because we're going to have a big batch of demonstrations that Joe's going to get into. Thought I'd just break up the structure of the webinar, almost slightly remove the natural flow, and start with a bit of a ChatGPT v CoPilot examples. I should have asked how many people use ChatGPT, but I think what we would say is the IT team sees ChatGPT in its rawest form as a superior product to CoPilot. But we wanted to use some examples of using the chat function. Now, technically, what we're going to be comparing while it's in Teams is actually the same as the web-based free edition, as in it's the same sort of back end. It's got a bit more functions here that you can use to interact with your business, but the kind of the core of some of the examples I'm showing is the same as the free edition. So I'm going to start off with some examples. I'm going to be pausing and I could bugger this up and have to jump back, so I do apologize, but I'm just going to be showing a series of examples. As we mentioned, we are recording. We recorded these earlier. So the example I'm going to show is us writing an email, or no, I want to help generating a title for this message we'd be sending to our customers. So this is just an example. We had an email we wanted to send out, and we just thought, what's a good title for this? And I thought I'd plug it into ChatGPT and CoPilot. Just a very basic example. So I fired them off. So as you can see, CoPilot, ChatGPT's come back with one title, which is interesting. Seems good enough. CoPilot's come up with 5. CoPilot actually seemed a teeny bit faster, which is cool. So technically, CoPilot's also got a couple of examples of what you could do. So I quite like the prompts there, but that's just a very simple example. I'd say both of them get a pass mark. As you can see, yeah, that the interfaces are not too dissimilar at the moment, considering I've hid the history. Now, my next one, I'm going to pull a bit of an unusual example. So one of the team at the IT team, Alex, he was talking to someone he knew in Texas, and they took a photo of a burger and sent it to him, and he wanted to see what the AI did. So I've asked the question, can you identify who makes this burger? Hint, Texas. So I'm pasting that in. I'm also pasting the image of the burger. Now, one thing is CoPilot makes that a bit more difficult. ChatGPT, you can paste from anywhere, and I'm going to go for it. So you can send it on both. This is obviously probably not a good professional example, but what CoPilot, ChatGPT has done is it's identified Whataburger. Now, Alex has said that is correct, although if you go through the answer, you can see it is a little bit of a lucky guess. CoPilot's come up with a couple of examples, so not really, I guess you could say that's a win to ChatGPT, although I'd say it's not a massive win. But that's something that you can do with ChatGPT. It does identify images, although CoPilot can do that as well. The next example is a bit more elaborate. So in one of the slides that you'll see soon, I wanted to demonstrate I wanted to create a graph. It was more of a visual sort of tool rather than actually something, sorry, not a visual tool, more of just an icon rather than any kind of functional tool. But the graph I wanted to show was having the bottom axis of time, which is 1 to 6 weeks, and the side axis as positivity. I know there's a better way to write that. And I've said it should start high and then plunge very low for a 2-week period, then increase back up to halfway. So I know that's a little bit, I could have done that a lot better, but it was just showing an example. So I plugged it into both ChatGPT and CoPilot. So CoPilot has gone to Designer to try and generate an image, which is interesting. ChatGPT is thinking, and it looks like it's going to create a graph. So ChatGPT ultimately has created a graph. I would say the positivity is a bit higher than I'd want for week 6, but ultimately it has done what I wanted it to do. It has effectively started high, dropped down to low, and then gone back up to a decent period for week 6. It's generally understood the brief, which is great. I've asked it to make it rounded while I'm waiting for CoPilot, which is taking its time, and that is because it's generating an image. Now, CoPilot has generated a series of images. Now, the problem is that those images are not actually what I wanted. It looks cool. They definitely look flash. That one there in the bottom right is particularly interesting. But they did not meet what I wanted, and the words and everything, it's all over the place. You got weeks over here, you got weeks. It's just, it's more of an image that you wouldn't actually want to look at. Whereas what you've got on the left is generally what I asked for, although it has failed to smooth it on this instance. The other example I did actually do it. Now, it had this editing function that I've never used before, but ultimately I would say ChatGPT has done a good job with this task. CoPilot has not been able to do it. Lastly, one thing I use AI for, just excuse that glitch, I use AI for is transcribing my handwriting. I've got this tablet, and I write down a lot of notes, and I like to get ChatGPT or CoPilot to turn that into text. So here is an example. I have sent it from my remarkable tablet. This is what it's called, not what I describe it, to my computer, and then I've copied the image in. Again, bit of a nuisance with CoPilot. You've got to save it to OneDrive, then copy it, but it does work. Here is the page of how it looks, and remarkable. My writing, very difficult to understand what I've written, to be fair. Now, I've sent it away. CoPilot has said they prefer not to do this conversation, and then it said I can't chat about this. ChatGPT has actually done it pretty damn close to what I've actually written. Now, that one I tried to make my handwriting neater than usual, which it wouldn't look like that from looking at it, but it was. So it's actually done a pretty good job. CoPilot, this is an example. It can often refuse to do what you want. Now, we know it can look at images, and Joe was doing his own demonstration here earlier, doing a test, and what did it do, Joe, with your one? It did it, but then it basically did a very poor job. Is that fair?
No. It couldn't do the transcribe from a whiteboard recording or picture.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had exact same results as what you had.
Yeah. So we regularly take photos of the whiteboards when we're scribbling on them, for a meeting, etc., and then we'll put it into these tools to transcribe, and it does do a good job. So usually, but CoPilot either hit or miss, or now refusing to do it. Disappointing. I will continue to the next slide. So just moving forward, we have been conducting these co-learning sessions with a series of customers. So it's usually different customers, so all from across our customer base. We've done 4 this year. Generally, there's about 6 customers per room, although there's a few absences in that one. We do 6 weeks of sessions, although often it will stretch out to about 8. There are always different experience levels within the group. Some people had a license for the entire year, and some people had never had just got the license to do the co-learning group. And yeah, we started at the beginning of the year, and we concluded one of them just last week. So they're an interesting exercise, and the idea for us is trying to take interested parties the purpose was to help them develop whether this was something they wanted to expand within their organization. I think generally, there's probably some of the attendees on the call, I think positive in the sessions, even if the product may not have always met their desired goals. So what were the outcomes? There's always there's optimistic entry. People enter into this exercise like we did with a high degree of optimism. They have heard about the product. They've heard someone say, you've got to get on board with this, or a board member or a friend of theirs that it's a game changer. They've heard all these sort of things. They've seen LinkedIn people talking about, IT people in some cases, or generally, I don't know who these people are, but the people saying that it's going to double my productivity and all that type of thing. And so people enter into this with a high degree of optimism. Now, what we find, and I'll explain these reasons, is after several weeks, after a couple of weeks, there's quite a bit of confusion and disappointment. Sometimes it's confusion initially, and then it's disappointment. And then when it comes to the end, there's some optimism, but it's a bit tempered. I had a I didn't bump into him. There was a Microsoft event in Auckland last month, and I sort of hit the guy up from Microsoft, and I said, "What are you guys seeing? Because we're seeing less positivity." And he thought, "Oh, look, people go like this. They're up high, then they go down low, and then they go back up high." And I said, "No, it's more like this: up high, and then sort of somewhere around here." And he didn't think that was fair, or he didn't like it, but that's what we have seen. But generally, no one across our customer base usually is suggesting an immediate mass rollout. Like, hey, this is a game changer. We're going to roll it out to everyone. It's going to increase our productivity. No one's talking about it eliminating roles. That's just, it's just nowhere near there. But a lot of the time there's either a small rollout planned, so to just expanding it to a few people, or in some cases, look, I'm not going to expand this. So if I just go into the optimistic start, so that's generally, this was the image I attempted to produce earlier that actually did what I wanted. So even ChatGPT, it's sometimes inconsistent, but aren't we all? So optimistic start. So I think that's due to assuming the hype of the marketing was real, not disputed. It was, quite clear. I've noticed in the sources that I get news and information from, I've only just started to see a little bit of negativity on CoPilot, but generally speaking, most people are saying, this is a game changer and that type of thing. They've seen other tools. So the attendees, they've seen other tools. They've seen ChatGPT. They might use it occasionally. The problem with ChatGPT is it's outside your organization, so you can't really get a sense of how much you could use it to improve your day-to-day. But they've seen the potential of AI. They know what AI is capable of, and they've just assumed that Microsoft was going to be at or above the likes of ChatGPT. Now, in many cases, the optimistic start comes from people identifying a clear and often complex use case that will benefit their day-to-day or their organization's day-to-day. Then comes the disappointment, confusion phase. Unusual issues and responses. That one we showed earlier where it said, no, I can't do this. You will get that from time to time when you are doing when you're doing something that it can do. You do get unusual responses. Sometimes it is because there's just something wrong with the setup, or your office is playing up or something, and sometimes it is the tool. So this next point, there's often a question, I still sometimes are asking this 10 months on, I'm 11 months on. Is it me? Is it a glitch? Or is it the tool? What I mean by that is it something to do with my setup or the way I'm asking the question? Is it a glitch with CoPilot in the back end? Or is it actually that it just can't do it? And that's a regular question that people are asking. And that's frustrating. And generally the disappointment comes from that complex use case I talked about earlier, that being really far away, and them basically not being able to get past step 1 and 2, let alone get to step 10 in their use case. And I think then the other one is Outlook. There's this presumption that Outlook is going to, because a lot of the attendees in this room would spend a lot of their day-to-day in Outlook, and the perception that if I could save an hour a day of time due to CoPilot, then it's going to be a massive help. And it's just not able to do, it's not as usable as we would think, as I think everyone expects. Then the final realism, optimism, I would say, the disappointment fades. We all have short memories, but you start to be able to try and measure the benefits of the functions that do work for you. So, you might have one thing that you can see as being a usable benefit, and then so instead of the potential, you're thinking, okay, that is a usable thing. I can lean on that, and it will help. So they determine it may have a return on investment, but even if it's not a home run. And then there's a belief that the product will improve, which is fair. And we say that a couple of times in this slide, that it will improve. It's just half-assed. So Now, one thing we do see, this is just broadly, doesn't mean if you're optimistic, it's blind or broad. I just need to be clear on that. But we do see there's a general optimism. So I think people, there's a belief that the use cases will be repeatable and replicatable across the organization. They're going to have a significant gain. I think this often stems from having one example go really well and then them sort of thinking it's highly replicatable. And so they start to sort of expect it to work based on something they have seen or done a couple of times. And I think what I'd say, what we find is that demonstrations of CoPilot can be very strong, and AI in general. I'm sure some people might be in here. The first time you see ChatGPT, someone types in 3 sentences and it gives you 6 pages or 3-page something that looks amazing. You don't scrutinize that when you first see it. You're just sort of surprised by the level of input and output. And wow, this looks amazing, but I think often the challenge is when you actually try and read that and use it, you sometimes come a bit unstuck. So that was just a bit of a journey of what we're seeing across our customer base or across the co-learning groups, just to give you an idea if you were to take this on, or it might replicate your experience if you've had CoPilot. You start optimistic, pretty disappointed, come out the other side somewhere in the middle. And we've tried to explain what that is. And sometimes that optimism is real and useful, and sometimes it's maybe a little bit unuseful. But I'm going to now pass over to Joe, who's going to get into some demonstrations. So this next part is going to take 15 to 20 minutes, and we're going to get right into them. So, cool. Joe.
Thanks, Conan.
Take it away.
Right. So I think first off, we're going to start with Outlook. Like Conan mentioned, it's one of the apps we use the most on a day-to-day basis. So naturally, our expectation for it is pretty high. So yeah, we'll just start off here. There's just my mailbox on screen there. And what we want to try and showcase here is just CoPilot's ability to draft an email with its own way of composing an email body based on certain criteria that you would give it.
Sorry, it's stalled. Excuse me, Joe.
It's okay. So I've just added in a subject line there, and I'm going to add in something for direction similar to what the subject line is. Just asking Conan that we can have a quick chat next week about an upcoming webinar. So off the bat, CoPilot adds a body of the email there, but I can see that it doesn't exactly even end an email when, the way I do it. It looks different. Even the final message, looking forward to hearing from you, is not something I would typically send to Conan. And then I played around with, changing the tone from professional to more, casual, or even shortening it. But I mean, none of the options really hit home with this. So it's more of a miss than anything else. And I would ultimately say that this function could work for you if you're sending an email for someone that you don't know at all, and you needed a base email body. But if you wanted to create something for someone you knew, otherwise, a teammate or a client that you're regular in contact with, or you wanted to reply to someone, the same will apply. It'll be a weird experience if I had to send Conan something about the way CoPilot drafted an email, because he would possibly think it was like spam or junk or something, and I don't think it will be well received.
And I think this example, this here is probably not too dissimilar to the email that you might send me, Joe, but you could have written that in the same amount of time that you spent dabbling with the CoPilot. So
exactly. So I think productivity part of it then is also, if you've got to weigh up the time it would have taken you to create it, plus the time for CoPilot to create it, and you having to go back and edit it, plus do the spacing and so forth, then at the end of the day, is there really a big advantage? Yeah, it's the we still need to decide, I think, is the ultimate takeaway from Outlook.
My personal take, Joe, is the realization I've had in the last year is that if it doesn't sound like you, and it doesn't have your sort of, way of talking and what you would say, then it's not really going to be useful to you. And I think what we're
Yeah,
seeing in the, on the industry is if you realize that someone has written something with ChatGPT or Copilot, you don't want to read it because you're like, well, why am I reading this? If they can't write it, what can I? It's not even about the what's fair. It's just about, oh, I don't really want to read it because I don't know how legit it's going to be. So ultimately, I think we've learned something, after assuming this would be an amazing function. I think
exactly.
until it can truly replicate what you would say and it's accurate and it sounds like you, it's not going to be useful.
But you know what? In thinking about that, if the closer it gets to to talking like you, the closer it'll get to walking like you. So, is it something, that's a bigger discussion than is moving towards something that can ultimately, replace you, which is scary. So,
Yeah,
it's
go and get some
functionality we want.
canned food on the way home, Joe.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
functionality that we want, but yeah, there's also a scary side to it, I suppose. Um,
yeah.
the next example we had here was Word document, and looking into what the capabilities of Copilot in Word is, or what we can expect there. So what we wanted to do here is we wanted to create a proposal for a dummy client called Acme. Some of you might have heard about it before. And we wanted to add notes from a recent customer meeting we had with them. And we wanted to add it into a IT proposal version 2 document that you can see on screen there as like a base template for Copilot to use, and then take the notes and then go and replace the similar parts of the document, the similar type of information that I've given in the notes, add that into the proposal,
Still
and
in the
then
user
let's see
interface.
what it does. Okay, so there I pasted the notes in, and away it goes. So now we can see it's starting to add some content to the document pretty quickly. Seems like spacing is good. And while it's doing that, I wanted to show the audience what that template document proposal looked like. So you can see that it's got our branding, colors. There's some schematics and some pictures and tables and so forth in that document. So the idea is we want Copilot to use that and interrogate, that document and add data to it. So, it aids in our productivity. So while that's finishing off, it'll finish off in a couple of seconds. I think it's stalled again, maybe.
Oh yes,
Connor?
let's try. Yeah, it does seem to be stalling and I'm just not paying
Yeah.
enough attention, Joe.
So what I thought next is let's compare the two documents side by side and see what happened. So on the left is the Copilot. I hope it's your left too.
Yep.
On the left is the Copilot newly created document, and on the right is our template document with our branding. So scrolling through the document, we can see that there's a couple of changes. Our colors and branding has not been kept or moved across or copied across. The schematics have just fallen away. The table is there still, so that's good. And then we go through the content of the document, and at the end of this of the Copilot document, we see our managed services implementation process on the new one. And in our template, we can see it there, but there's additional information. Plus, there's an additional page as well with keeping connected and some other information that the Copilot one seems to have dropped off. There's a stage 2 transformation projects as well, which is completely gone from the Copilot one for some other reason, which we haven't been able to figure out. So for some reason, it drops content at the end of documents. And this is something that it's done repeatedly, and we've played around with it quite a bit, but it always seems to end up with the same outcome. which is, there's a problem with some of it. The content is not 100%.
Even if the content was 100%, I think
Yeah,
the fact that it will not be able to take the content as it is, it really means it's a non-starter for us. We can't use a function that can't use something that is going to effectively require us to do a huge amount of manual work. So, it looks like it's pretty good, but ultimately it doesn't achieve it. So it's a
yeah.
non-starter.
The manual process for this that we were used to would just be better at it for us in this point in time. It's just easier to copy the note details across.
Next one, sure.
Cool. The next one was PowerPoint, CoPilot in PowerPoint. So we're going to use that same IT proposal, that Word document, and we want to create a proposal. We want to create a slide deck from that specific branded document. Let's see what it does. So off the bat, I mean, I think PowerPoint, CoPilot PowerPoint is very powerful. You can see it creating the outline of a presentation there on screen from the document. And then immediately afterwards, it starts creating the slides and adding speaker notes. Now, so if you had to do this manually, it would take you quite a bit of time, right? So from a bird's eye view, this all looks great. Initially, this is fast and great. Big push in productivity. But now we get to the content of how the presentation looks. And it seems we go through the presentation slides. The content, that's hit and miss over here. Some of the slides, like that one we've got on screen there, I don't exactly know what it's meant to do, but it doesn't. It's a good handshake, but that's about all it is. And then if we try to say we wanted to replace a specific image, like I've done an example there on screen, so we wanted to replace that image on screen with something else. 9 out of 10 times I've had problems with CoPilot, doing what I'm asking it when it's replacing slides. I think I told Colin last week I had one where it actually worked. I couldn't understand why, but most of the time it just doesn't work, and it comes up with that, "I'm sorry, I can't do that," explanation, which it doesn't really tell us why it couldn't do it. Except that, it generally can, answer questions about the presentation. Whoopee. Then I tried a different angle. I asked it to add an additional slide to the presentation based on the company locations, which are part of the document, which then it had a problem doing too, which is weird because it could create the slides in the beginning from the document, but then having to go back and forth, then there was an issue somehow. Going further down the document, you could see the branding, look and feel. It's completely gone. CoPilot has used its own images and fonts and colors, especially. It didn't even bring the colors across, or our brand colors. So initially, you're thinking, great job, CoPilot for PowerPoint, but then
32 slides. Yeah.
Then 32 slides later, you've got to go and change a lot of stuff. I think it's on the right track.
Yeah,
I'm positive about PowerPoint, but yeah, there's quite a bit to do there.
It can. I would say this is useful if you wanted to take a document, maybe not this one, and you wanted to present it, and you had 15 minutes to prepare. And that 15 minutes, you're not going to be able to build one, but you might be able to do something. And it's going to get you to 60%. It's not going to get you to 100%. It's not going to get you to 20%, but it's going to get you to 60%. And yeah, so that's where I think it's at. Next one, Joe.
Yeah, so there was the past two recordings, some shortcomings on CoPilot. So the next one is actually one where CoPilot works extremely well, and that is in Teams. So what we did here was we wanted to reference back to one of our CoPilot working sessions we had with some of our clients. and we wanted to test the recap function. Or for this audience, we just added an example there. And please recap the meeting showing the initials of the attendees to, protect their privacy. And away it went. So for those that have not seen the recap function working in CoPilot, it is pretty amazing. We use it all the time. The only downside is it it tends to make you lazy because you don't need to make notes anymore because Copilot will do it for you. But it does a pretty good job in going and taking the transcript of the meeting and then going and taking out the key points or the recap of the specific meeting. So this is something that is probably for us internally to our organization. And I think with all our clients, for those that do use Copilot, I think it's probably one of the best features across the board. And I think it was the most valuable feature when Copilot just came out and we saw this. We were like raving. This was amazing. There's a couple of hitches in the beginning, but it's just gotten better and better and better. So I think most of the success from Copilot, I think 9 out of 10 people will rate the Teams one as the best. So then what we did during this specific Copilot learning session, we wanted to do an exercise or example where Conan would ask our attendees what our favorite dessert was. And then immediately after that, we wanted to ask Copilot then, can you list the favorite desserts of the attendees here? Which it did. And so this was during the live meeting that it could do this for us, right? So it could pull the information that you were asking immediately. And then after this, as a bit of a party trick, Conan also asked it to create a table of that specific information, which it did a tremendous job of. So you'll see that in a couple of seconds. So this is actually new tables that it's created now because of the initials and not the full names, but it can still do that. And this meeting was held on the 1st of October. So that's the cool thing about it as well. You can go way back to a meeting and go and hunt for information, go and ask questions. You can go and ask it stuff like, what are the next steps? What are the next actionable items? Who's responsible for what? The opportunities are endless. It's how you prompt the system, I suppose, is the important thing. But Copilot does give a lot of options and examples of stuff that you can ask it. But the Copilot in Teams is probably one of the best.
I will regularly use it to go back to a meeting 3 weeks, 4 weeks ago to find out if a fact or a conversation happened that I just can't quite recall. And it is very handy now. Not every meeting is recorded or transcribed, but a lot of the meetings we have like this will be transcribed. And it does do a pretty bloody good job of it. Joe, as you can see, JF CD, I was the pecan pie. JF Melbourne pudding. I didn't know what that was. That is not a spell check. That is not a typo, is it, Joe? Is that right?
No, it's good. It's good.
He's got it right. What I would say though is when we first started using Copilot, we started to, sort of currently I'll be in potentially sort of 30 to 40 meetings a week, maybe 30 probably. So many just at the moment, and a lot of them are short, but we kind of initially thought we'd have get notes automatically and have a process of sending notes around for every meeting. And the challenge with that was we just were drowning in notes that we just weren't reading. So you need to be quite specific about when you want to do that. And I think it's important, depending on the number of meetings you have, to determine to maybe not necessarily make a permanent decision about how you're going to use it until you start to try. And I think it is important, particularly when you're having detailed meetings, to have someone that is not only going to generate notes and just send them around, but they need to be responsible for the notes, and they're going to make sure they're correct and make sure that things aren't missed, because it's very much like a 90%, maybe 80 to 90%. So it's not perfect. It doesn't replace entirely the sort of authenticator, the owner role, but it can really help save a bit of time. We will continue. Next one, Joe.
Cool. Next one, Copilot there in Teams. And this is when I wanted to ask Copilot to retrieve information for Teams meetings between myself and Conan for October and November this year, and checked how it would respond to that prompt. So yeah, it starts adding or giving us information there. Initial look is, wow, there's quite a bit in there.
Looks great at the outset. You look at it and go, wow,
Yeah,
look at that, it looks
well,
awesome. Yeah.
so I start going through the listings there, and yeah, it's you're starting to realize that some of the meetings. I mean, we've had a lot of Copilot workgroup sessions in October, but they don't all seem to be there. Uh, yeah, the good thing is it also had scheduled meetings. I see there's a couple of scheduled meetings in November, but there's a lot of scheduled meetings that we have on a weekly basis, and they're just not listed here, although some of them are. Um, and yeah, so you start comparing, going back and forth, then between Outlook and Teams, and going and seeing what was scheduled and what was not. And you come to realize that some of the information, or the information, is missing other information. It's not comprehensive.
It
I
does
don't know
say
what the
there are
reason for
50.
that is, though.
Yeah, it does say there are 50 meetings at the bottom, but I can tell you from my experience with this, it,
Yeah,
it probably isn't true. It may not be true, and also sometimes you give it a more specific narrow, and it won't
yeah.
necessarily get it. So this is not just our misinterpretation. What have you got
So
below,
what I
Joe?
thought of, yeah. So what I thought of then is maybe it's just the way, because the prompting is very important. So I thought, let me pose it differently, um, and I used the word that both of us attended. And getting the list there, I can see the first one was just an Outlook calendar appointment that I set for myself. It wasn't a Teams meeting, so no idea why it's listed
Don't know
there.
anything about that.
The weekly SOC stand up was on Friday. Last week, Friday, it was a holiday in Canterbury, so I don't think anybody attended that. Um, yeah, so there's a lot of holes. But then I
I
thought, oh well,
literally attended none of those meetings except for the bottom two and maybe
yeah.
that number three. Yeah.
So I thought I'll try a different word. Instead of attend, I'll use a present, and then I got that one answer there, which is a breakout period I have in my diary every day, and that's not something that Conan is invited to. So,
No,
but there
you
was
definitely
nothing
wouldn't invite
else.
me to that, Joe. That would
Yeah.
defeat the purpose.
So there was just, yeah, it was more of a miss and then a hit and then a hit again and miss than anything else. Yeah.
Yeah,
In this
it's a good
specific
example.
example, but
It's a good example of
yeah.
it looking like a mirage. Like it looks great at the like when you first do it, without you digging into the detail, it appears to be solid, and then you start to psychologically go, "Oh, imagine all the benefit this could provide our team," and you start to sort of build momentum in your head about how it could help. But then when you get to the root and determine that actually it's not accurate, you start to realize, oh, actually we can't use this feature at all. Um, Not to say that it's sometimes, Lucy in our organization, she uses this function a lot, not specifically the meeting thing, but trying to find files and documents. And she often will get success, but she just sort of says it is just hit or miss. Sometimes you get it, sometimes it will save you time, sometimes it won't.
I think the more specific you are, the better. So you've got to do specifically what you're wanting or watching information for, and trying to get it, whatever it needs to look for. You need to be as specific as possible. I think that's the big thing with
I don't think
Copilot.
it's thorough though, Joe. I don't think it's
Yeah,
designed to sort of be precise about all of the meetings. It's good at getting some. Anyway, we'll
yeah.
continue to the next one.
Okay, cool. Then this is the last one. So this was I wanted to get information about our Copilot work group team sessions. So I tried to, the keywords there was Copilot and workgroup and teams and session, because I mean, all the meetings were scheduled in Teams, so Copilot should know about it. And the first thing I asked it was, when was the first Copilot Teams meeting for this chat? And it said it was last week, Tuesday at 2 p.m., which was, which is incorrect. That was not when it was. Um, so then I thought, okay, cool. Second prompt, let's ask it about what training, what was said about training in the session. And I looked across this, and it looked pretty good. mentioning of licensing, accessing the apps, the clip training that the attendees needed to complete to give them a base background of all the apps and the functions. Yeah, and then we would have the weekly meetings and orientation checks. So that looked pretty good. The last question I had for it was about CoPilot Studio, which was something specific in one of the sessions that I mentioned. But the response here was just totally left field. I don't know where it got the information from, but it didn't touch base on or anything I had to say about CoPilot Studio. And then I thought to myself, well, a couple of minutes ago, I asked the exact same prompts and I redid it for some reason. And I went back and the exact same 3 questions was asked in a chat prior to the one I just showed you. So the first one, when was the first CoPilot workgroup team session? And it actually gave me the correct answer. And I'm like thinking, okay, cool. So a couple of minutes apart, it's a new chat, same question, same wording. It's not phrased differently, but the result is different. I went ahead, asked the second question about the training. It gave me the same information. So spot on with the other chat. And then the last option about the CoPilot Studio, it gave me completely different information in bullet point format, whereas the first one or the second one I did, sorry for the confusion, it was paragraphs like it shows on screen there. So yeah, it was just all over the place. Some of the information accurate, but it tends, if you asked at the same time or in a different chat, it would be different. So lots of hits and misses with trying to go back and retrieving information from the tool.
And I think, even that example, it was deriving not from the Teams meeting, but from documents we produced. So it's kind of sometimes getting the right answer, but it's getting it from unusual sources. So yeah, it's a very peculiar sort of bit of a roller coaster getting this, because it can seem excellent and then you sometimes realize it's just too inconsistent to be usable. So what works well? From our point of view, this is our point of view, and I guess the point of view of the group, the collection of, I don't know, 20 or so customers we've had collaborative engagement with on this. Teams recapping, we call it an A. That was the example Joe gave earlier. It's a truly useful and beneficial tool, but it really does depend if you are using Teams meetings frequently, like we do. If you have one Teams meeting a week, or you mostly have meetings in person, unless you have sort of specialized kit, you're not going to get tremendous benefit out of that. The Teams recapping, we'd say it's excellent. Forms, we'd say it's great. We didn't demonstrate it because we just have to pick what we do, but Forms works really well. If you do make forms, I would suggest you use CoPilot for it because it could really boost you. Middling, Teams chat, Joe's, some of the examples that I showed, I'd say it's a B-. I'd say if you're not heavily using ChatGPT, you can get benefit from it. I think we've got colleagues that use it as their primary tool, and we have some of the group that do, and they find it to be decent, but just not great. So we'd say it's middling. Word, B-. It can kind of do a bit, but it's just not able to kind of do it in a way that is truly groundbreaking or truly sort of regularly applicable. And PowerPoint would sort of give it a B. I think of these three, it is the better option, particularly if you want to take a document and turn it into a decent presentation. Certainly not a great one. I think you'd almost need to explain that it is an AI, it is a CoPilot generated document, because otherwise you might look a little bit silly because it might be a little bit weird. But it's decent. Not very well. Outlook, we would say failure. Excel, just not useful. We haven't even shown it because we just don't think it is worthwhile. And even maybe some of these other functions, B- might be positive, overly positive, but we didn't want to just take our opinion. We wanted to take the opinion of what we got from our customers. So the challenges that we see, glitches remain an issue. Some of the attendees, customers, and some of you may have had the same thing, have issues with key functions that you were not, nor we were aware of for weeks, and it really can derail the experience. Momentum is a problem. It's very common for us to see users attempt a few things, doesn't go to plan, and then decide they're going to come back to it, or think, oh, I will use it, but it didn't give me a great benefit, so I'll come back to it. I've just been a bit busy. And the result is that they just barely use it. That's very common, we see. Particularly in more senior resources that just so time poor. They want to get a tool to help them improve their usage, and then it ends up taking time. Teams is the key return on, has a key, is the key to a return on investment. So if you're using Teams meetings regularly, you'll get a strong return on investment, but and it will keep users engaged with the product to a degree. We'd say brilliance is skin deep. So what we often skin deep. So a demonstration or an initial test example can look strong, but until you scrutinize it, sometimes you might, it might look better than it actually is. But this can build an assumption that the tool is more usable than it actually is. I'm not sure what I wrote there. Joe's example of a Teams lookup request, but if you go into the detail, you'd see that it is actually not usable. But at a glance, if we didn't tell you about the fact that it's not accurate, you might have gone away. I'm talking to attendees. You may have gone away and thought that you could do that for yourself. So you need to know what the problem is. You need to know how accurate it is. And sometimes I think people can see other examples and just will see something online and Microsoft's market as an example and just think, oh, we could do this ourselves and it's going to be so good. But yeah, problems. So our key hopes and I guess disappointments for the product, we really think that better support for file types would be helpful. What we mean by that is CoPilot really needs it to be uploaded into SharePoint or OneDrive. And if it's not, even if it supports a document, it makes it very hard to use. They only just started supporting PowerPoints for the the PowerPoint confusion. Sorry, PDFs for the PowerPoint conversion. But yeah, it just makes it difficult. Copying and pasting is really hard. It just slows you down. CoPilot needs to adopt a sound like me feature and a memory feature, but more importantly, at present, if you think about an Outlook, every time you are writing something, it's a fresh request. It has no context of you. And I think that's part of the problem. If you think about in our sort of imagination, sci-fi, whatever, the AI assistant, it kind of is constantly aware of your background and your data and your information, whereas CoPilot is doing a fresh engagement every time. And that is ultimately a problem. CoPilot needs to work better with documents and branding. The examples we gave with branding, existing documents, it's just the fact that it can't do it means that I know that we were talking to a Microsoft user like, oh, you can use the branding systems. Even if that is the case, it just gets you closer, but it's still very far away from the task that allows me to do something in 5 minutes that would otherwise only take me 45 minutes. CoPilot needs to be able to edit. It seems to be just refusing to do it. I'd say, yeah, CoPilot presently refuses to do tasks that ChatGPT would do. And these are not controversial things. This is not making strange artwork of Joe Biden and Donald Trump playing golf, although I did do that with Midjourney. These are just functional things like the transcription. It just refuses to do it. And when CoPilot will not do a task, it doesn't really tell you why. So you don't know what the problem is or whether it's just a feature that doesn't work. But generally I'd say CoPilot's very much like a unenthusiastic, uncooperative staff member that just continuously sort of doesn't seem to do what you want it to do, but it has the capability, which is always frustrating. Excel needs to be more useful at analyzing documents. At the moment, it can only analyze tables. If you're thinking of getting CoPilot for Excel, don't. CoPilot should be able to act more like a personal assistant, kind of what I talked about earlier. It definitely has some of the prompts. You can see Microsoft moving in that direction, but it just lacks the overall functions. I'm going to quickly go through this because we're over time. I apologize to all the attendees. Other useful AI applications, ChatGPT, it's still the gold standard for us generating content or solving problems. Otter AI, we use that for offline meetings. So if we go to a meeting room without technology, record, use that. It's pretty good. It doesn't identify people, which helps. And it may be superior to CoPilot using the recapping, but we're just not using it because it's just not as secure. just based on the fact that it's outside our ecosystem. Perplexity, this is a very well, there's a lot of people that are very big fans of this over ChatGPT. We personally haven't, at least the key people that test AI a lot in our organization aren't using it as the primary, but we know it is a very powerful tool. Claude, we've tested that for some time. My wife uses it as in their organization as one of their key tools. Another competitor to ChatGPT and is quite good. It now has a desktop app and is going to be able to control your desktop, which is a bit scary. Fireflies is another one that's a meeting recap competitor. Because we've said that CoPilot does a very good job with meeting recaps and the other functions are not great, it would be understandable if people concluded they just need a good recap tool, which is something that we do contemplate. But we do want to use Microsoft because it is part of the system and it's just one less privacy and security issue to worry about. Protecting your data, I'll be very brief here. SharePoint permissions, if you're spreading this wider than yourself, you're going to need to be careful about SharePoint permissions. We'd suggest there are audits that can be done. We could assist you with that, but focus on your sensitive areas, contracts, HR, budgets, etc. Just making sure people just that shouldn't have access don't have access. Teams meetings, when you start to use it, you start to realize you need to be careful about what you're saying, sharing, just because it's going to, if it's going to be recorded or transcribed, could be an issue. We're going to talk about policies next and your vendor systems. What are your vendors doing? Are large language models involved? For example, LinkedIn recently enabled a setting which allowed personal data to be used without an opt-in. It was sort of an opt-out and it's caused a bit of a storm. So you're just going to be careful about what your vendors are doing. Now, AI and governance, there are different policies. So you have your sort of code of conduct, and I say that in a term about what your staff should not do. Then you might have an internal stance on this, what the stance across the organization is. And then you may have an external one, which may associate with your contracts or your marketing or your branding. They all need to be considered, and they are all different. They might sort of have the same kernels, but the thing that's your code of conduct is not something that it would affect what you're doing externally, but it's not the messaging you're putting out there. What do your contracts privacy say about AI, if anything, or do they need to change because of the AI situation if you're using AI? Are your staff using AI tools presently without your knowledge exactly, or are they just using them? Could they be accidentally sharing sensitive information? And how could you gather this information? We've been using some surveys internally to just try and understand what people are doing in a non sort of big brother way. And there is a need to consider openness versus restriction. So if I explain that, if you're an organization, and we have had clients do it, that just said, no, we cannot use any AI tool except for CoPilot, or we cannot use any AI tool full stop. It does restrict you from trying new things, or your staff from potentially looking at ways to improve. So you've got to sort of find the right balance of how could you enable, I guess, a level of evolution and progression, but without opening you up to, I guess, the vulnerabilities of what AI introduced. So consider those. We try and stick towards the restriction end, but keep ourselves the window to actually do what we need to do to try tools and progress. How to improve your chances of success. I'm realizing I'm accelerating here. Consider, if you do want to use it, consider who could get the most value, but also consider those that may be inquisitive. Often we see they're given to the top tier of the organization, and sometimes they just don't have time to play around with it. And so it ends up sitting on the sort of the maybe pile. If you have multiple users, organize your own co-learning session, regular check-ins, testing things, targeting specific tools. Try Outlook for a week, try Teams for a week. Don't just listen to us. And I'd say avoid too much positivity and also avoid too much negativity, because those two can sort of affect each other. Licensing, it's very simple. It's about $600 a year per user. There's a not-for-profit discount that's coming, or it might be available now. You can also get a discount. You get one free if you get 10. Microsoft are actually dropping the price, and I do think this is a sign of their expectations on the product maybe not being a runaway success. And they have just announced that they will allow monthly payment on an annual commitment. So, and it does cost a little bit more, but that's expected at the end of the year. Now, you can do it with one user, you can do it with 100. All options are available. Final impressions, comments. Updates are coming, but They have not been massive, although we have quietly seen it get a little bit better between earlier in the year and this year. Microsoft do have a track record of getting their act together over a few years, but we would just have expected it to be much faster. Generally, across what we're seeing, perception is underwhelming compared with the marketing. Teams Recap is the clear winning feature. If you use Teams meetings on a regular basis, this is likely to be a solid investment for you. If you need to produce presentations on short notice, there could be value, as long as they didn't need to be brilliant. And there's lots of other features that are just a work in progress, we'd say at the moment. That's a polite way to say it. We would have showed CoPilot owners, but we're well over, so we will have to leave that for a separate blog or article or something. It's probably not so webinar. Questions. I know we're over time, so we'll only we'll leave the floor open for a little bit, but we know that we are almost 10 minutes over where we should be right now. We thank you for attending. We are going to post in, we might email the attendees, but Tay, if you could post in the form, we would love it if the attendees could fill in the survey. It just helps us get better, helps us learn. It should only take less than a minute. Feel free to suggest things we should do, and yeah, that would be really appreciated. And look, given we didn't give much time and we didn't ask for feedback in advance, send us an email, inquiries at the IT team or to your account manager. We do love to talk about this stuff and give advice. So tell us what you think. Tell us your experience if it's different from what we're seeing. If this is, if you challenge anything we've shown, we'd love to hear about it. So please, yeah, do get in touch about it. We thank you very much for your attendance again. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you on the next one. Good luck.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone.